With Elisabeth, Valerio is the country's only presidential candidate after successfully overturning the Electoral Commission's rejection of her nomination papers. That country is set to go to the polls come the 23rd of August. Valerio and several other presidential candidates were disqualified, with the ZEC citing bank challenges. She takes on incumbent Emmerson Mnangagwa and opposition leader Nelson Chamisa of the Citizens Coalition for Change. Her challenge is seen as historic for women, at least, and their participation in politics. For more on her victory and perhaps the road ahead, Elisabeth Valerio joins us now via our video link. And it's lovely to have you on the program, ma'am. Thanks so much indeed for making time. And so much being said, of course, about your groundbreaking victory in court, but more importantly, this historic moment of Zimbabwe having their first presidential candidate ahead of the elections. But let's begin perhaps with a profile of how you got into politics, because you're a biochemist by profession, I understand.
I certainly am. I'm a biochemist who thought I was actually going to spend my life focusing on human health. And with a particular interest, of course, on our continent. But I found myself living in the wilderness in Zimbabwe, in Hwange, after my mom unfortunately passed away in 2011. And she left me the responsibility of looking after a conservation space. While I was living there, the government, the current government, essentially made a decision to allow coal mining in a national park. And that is when I essentially became very aware of, one aspect of what is wrong in Zimbabwe, but I led a campaign to try to stop coal mining by foreign nationals in our national park. And then it sort of propelled into more and more, people coming to me and saying, look, there are issues where people are coming in, invading land, telling us that we have to leave our ancestral burial sites. So I essentially became, consumed with trying to raise awareness of this issue, the fact that people were exploiting Zimbabwean land and I was not seeing Zimbabweans benefiting from it. In the context of our national park, fortunately, we won the court battle to protect the national park. The government did the right thing and reversed their decision or their position in terms of mining in national parks within Zimbabwe. But then I became very, very aware that there were many, many other issues as I was engaging with citizens throughout this country. Not only was our land at threat, we also have a situation in Zimbabwe where people just are not living a normal life. People do not have access to what should be basic human rights.
Absolutely. It's interesting to hear how you started out in politics, given just how much of gender issues are now placed seemingly at your door. How much of that feels like a burden for you, especially because, as you mentioned, you really are spoiled for choice, aren't you, when it comes to which of the issues to try to tackle in Zimbabwe?
Right. Look, it's an enormous undertaking. I can't do this alone. I have an incredible leadership team that we have been working with for the past 2 years. Our party is 2 years old. We formed in 2021. And we've got individuals who have special focus on different aspects. So, whether it's gender issues, in Zimbabwe, we have enormous, insurmountable problems. Young girls are being married at very young ages. We've got gender-based violence. We've got so many issues to tackle just in the context of being a woman and being concerned about women's interests. But then as a mother, I'm also concerned about the children growing up in Zimbabwe. The educational system has, which used to be one of the best in Africa, is no longer it no longer provides the education that people would expect. And most people can't even afford in our country to pay for school fees so their kids can go to school because of the economy. So it's just everything, that sitting around a table looking at issues and saying, what should we solve first? It's the whole country that needs to be fixed. And therefore, we made a concerted effort to shape the way towards building a new political party, which would form a new government for Zimbabwe. And I am the president of that political party.
Sure. Many in the commentariat still describe Zimbabwe as a relatively conservative country. I'll leave it up to you whether you reckon that's accurate. But I wonder to what extent you reckon those who look at this election through that lens may in some ways disadvantage you for that.
Well, certainly I think we've got a long way to go in order for citizens in Zimbabwe, I think even across our continent, to embrace the fact that a woman can lead a nation. And I do constantly struggle with trying to get our own citizens to focus on our capacity to lead, rather than the fact that I am a woman and I have, certain responsibilities and a role to play in society as a woman. But I think more and more in Zimbabwe, people are realizing that we have had, male leadership for so many years, and we're just not progressing. And when you sit down, and really this has been at the core of what we've done as a political party, is we sit down with our party members, we sit down with citizens, and we explain to them what should be done by a government, what a government should be doing for us. And as they start to focus on, really the objective measures that we are taking towards preparing Zimbabwe for a better future, the gender factor no longer becomes relevant.
Right.
And, we've got an enormous support base throughout Zimbabwe. We've been growing a grassroots, structure of governance throughout our nation. So I think we're well equipped to get past the outlook and the mindset of our citizens.
Yeah, hopefully. What overshadows any election, at least recently in Zimbabwe, is this idea that it's usually been in a cloud of controversy. I mean, there are people who are partakers of the election itself who are already raising questions about whether or not the lay of the land is one that allows for free and fair elections. What's your response to people both in and out the country, because I think the diaspora is watching this quite closely, who are disillusioned, quite frankly, around the elections and whether or not this will lead to any change in a context where sometimes it's just seen as an academic exercise more than anything else?
Well, certainly going into this election, for me, it felt very much as if though it was, there's a facade of democracy taking place in Zimbabwe, yet those who have real, those of us who've been shaping a path towards bringing change or being an alternative government for Zimbabwe are not even given the platform to be able to participate fully. It was really difficult for me to get on the ballot to participate in this election. And I have party leaders throughout our nation, more than 50% of our party leaders who could not get onto the ballot and still are in court fighting to get onto the ballot. So yes, it is an uneven, without a question, an uneven electoral environment. There are so many challenges that us as politicians in Zimbabwe are facing. I mean, even going towards the elections before we even got to nomination court, some of our, party members were attacked in, broad daylight at a shopping center in the community where they were trying to engage with citizens. The person that attacked them is now on the ballot in one of the communities in Zimbabwe. So it's very, very unfair. It's uneven. Police are not following up on that case, despite many requests on our part to try to make a follow-up. So there are challenges happening. We sometimes just deal with it behind the scenes, privately and quietly, and we know what we're facing. We know that it's not going to be a smooth environment. Now, I don't know, really all of the factors affecting every politician in Zimbabwe, but I can say to you, the only way that we are going to be able to move Zimbabwe forward, if you are in diaspora, for example, if a citizen is in diaspora and watching and listening, the only way we're going to be able to move Zimbabwe forward is for the citizens to use their vote, to use this opportunity on the 23rd of August to vote in a new government. And it has to be an overwhelming number of votes so that Zimbabwe's message is clear. We need very different leadership for this country. And really, we can't focus on all of the other factors that might be standing in our way. We just have to keep focused on getting that vote in.
Yeah, I mean, some members of the opposition who've spoken out about this have mentioned to us that it's not really about whether or not people come forward to vote. It's about whether or not the system itself is loyal to those people, is fair to people. There's been instances, as an example, where the numbers simply don't add up. And it doesn't seem like even that very overt discrepancy shifts the dial in some respects.
There is a lot of concern as I've traveled around the country. People ask me, even if I vote, is it a fair vote? Is it worth even voting?
Right.
A lot of people even believe that when they get into that ballot box, somehow the government knows who they're voting for. And now we've got members of the defense forces who are being told that they have to vote by mail-in ballot. And they're saying we don't want our votes to be known. We need the ability to vote in secrecy. So there are so many challenges, but this is why I keep emphasizing we need an overwhelming number so that you can essentially overcome those discrepancies. That's the only way that we're going to be able to deliver a true win in this country.
Yeah. All of this, of course, is taking place under the cloud of the Patriotic Bill, which has received criticism far and wide for people who are watching, of course, in the build-up to the election itself. How is that affecting your ability to campaign as openly as you'd have wanted to? Because part of what this bill says is that anybody who speaks in unfavorable terms of the government of the day, who is, of course, contesting the election, may find themselves in hot water with the law.
It does create a lot of fear for politicians in general. It creates a lot of fear for our, civic groups that are trying to advocate for issues that are of importance to our citizens. It closes the freedom of speech. It literally closes the space for us to be able to express concerns around issues that affect us all. It's completely unpatriotic, in my view. And there isn't a tremendous amount. I have not met a single citizen who supports it. Again, these are the sorts of things that once we are in government, we're going to have to review and hopefully reverse some of these actions that are being taken by the current government.
Yeah, I mean, even just the remarks you've just made, how worried are you that it puts you in danger, as an example?
There is a certain point where you have to not worry anymore about what is to come. If we don't get our voice out, if we don't speak out on issues, they won't be heard. These issues will continue to. It's not an easy road, and we will continue to do what's necessary to make sure that the world and the citizens around the world understand that it is time for us to change this country. It's time for us to take a step forward. Zimbabwe has been stuck in essentially on a downhill slope for so many years, for decades. And I've watched personally people in my community die just because they can't get proper medical care. I mean, at what point do you start realizing that things are just not, you can't look the other way anymore? The water sources that people are drinking today, every day in Zimbabwe, are probably not safe. I'm a scientist. I've actually looked and analyzed some of the water samples in our country. I've been to sites where individuals don't even get access to water. How do you survive without water? These are basic things that every citizen should have. So if it means that you have to be imprisoned for telling the truth, or speaking truth on issues that affect our people, I don't think the law really is for the citizens. And I think at some point the judiciary, when I look at the PVO bill, the very people that are being voted into government right now are the ones that voted for this bill. They had the opportunity to reverse it, to stop its progress. But instead it sailed through. So I think the message here from me is just Zimbabweans have to open their eyes, they have to wake up and realize that what is being done is not in their favor, and they need to choose a very, very different path, a different future, and that means a new government.
Elisabeth, Valerio, loud and clear, thanks very much indeed for your time, and all the very best with what remains of your campaigning in the lead-up to that much-anticipated election.